by the way, you're not the host here. He's out. So we thought we'd bring in some new talent here. And just given your background and your current role and job, I thought, what's the intersection between being a rabbi and mental health? And so we kind of came up with the idea of Shabbat and unplugging, which is such a huge part of what families are thinking about nowadays. So I think we can start by having you just introduce yourself a little bit more. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how and when you decide to enter into this current world that you're in. And maybe a little bit about what Shabbat is, and then we'll get into kind of stuff from there.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Do I call you Dr.
You can
Chapman?
Call me Jeremy, and I'll call you David.
As Jeremy said, my name is Rabbi David Chapman. I'm on the clergy team at Congregation Beth Shalom in Northbrook, Illinois. So hello to any Beth Shalomers that are watching on Facebook Live now.
Northbrook.
And it's really great to be here. And I just want to say that the studio is so impressive, and the work, Jeremy, that you're leading and facilitating and bringing other people into here is really cool and exciting.
Thank you. We are pumped.
It's fun to see it
up and running.
Right outside there, breaking ground on a new sensory garden. And
as of today, hot off the press.
It's really exciting. So I'm in my I'm only in my first year full time as a rabbi, but this is a journey that I've been on at some time. Like Jeremy, I was doing other things before I decided to pursue this particular path. And what's significant about that to this conversation is that Shabbat in particular is a practice that I adopted as an adult. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a moment. But I have the perspective of having someone who's lived with a rhythm of Shabbat in my life and who's lived without that rhythm. And so I can kind of see both sides of what it's done for me and my mental health and my spiritual health as well. So what is Shabbat? Shabbat is the day of rest as ordained by the Bible or the Torah. And it comes to us in the very beginning of the Torah. The very first thing that we read about is the story of creation. And God spends 6 days creating the world and everything in it, and then rests on the seventh day. And that's the first place where we get this idea of a rhythm of 6 days of labor, of creative work, of productivity, of making stuff, and then a seventh day to not make stuff. But actually, Shabbat has another narrative association. Are we okay?
Yeah, I saw a chat in here that says Deanne Friedman says hi.
Hi, Deanne.
Thanks for all of your help with this. I'll be trying to monitor the chat as we go. I might miss some stuff for a couple of minutes, but thanks for all of your help. We appreciate you.
So yes. A lot of people, so I think people may be more familiar with the aspect of Shabbat that has to do with that rhythm of creation, 6 days of creating and 1 day of rest. Mm-hmm. But there's another narrative in the Bible that is also associated with Shabbat, and that's the narrative of the liberation from slavery in Egypt. Okay. So when the Bible talks about the Sabbath, as we call it in English, it talks both about this idea of creation and rest, and it talks about this idea of work and liberation, freedom from work. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about Shabbat in my own life, and when I talk about it to other people, I try to think about both of those aspects, and I can go into a little bit more detail too, but that it's both additive and subtractive. There's a set of things that we don't do on Shabbat. Mm-hmm.
Which most people associate Shabbat with is not doing things.
Right, exactly. For instance, depending on what kind of Jewish community you're living in, you might find people that don't use electricity on Shabbat, that don't drive on Shabbat, that don't use money or buy things on Shabbat, that don't cook on Shabbat. Mm-hmm. This all that's like one aspect of the unplugging, right? And we may be a little bit more familiar with that. But then there's a whole other side of the coin, which is about what you do on Shabbat in place or with the time and the space you've created from that column of things you don't do. So not only are we instructed not to do certain things, we're instructed to do certain things, specifically to rest and to delight in Shabbat. Like the Oneg Shabbat is the mitzvah of reveling, joy, delighting in it, enjoying it. And those two those are two sides of the coin that relate to the two different narratives of Shabbat in the Torah.
And we should step aside for a moment and say, he comes from the Jewish faith, and he's talking in terms of Torah and that set of terminology and lingo. And of course, a lot of this is generalizable to other faiths and stuff. Of course, I'm out here repping SSM, Sisters of St. Mary Health, and then we have other, worldwide commonly followed faiths and practices, many of which incorporate some, it maybe not be called the same thing, but some element of rest to balance out the work. So if you're out there and you are, coming from a different population, just do a little bit of translation in your head. We're talking about the same concepts ultimately, but yeah.
Absolutely. So Shabbat has had kind of a renaissance recently, and it's come in at the same time that there's been a lot of discussion, particularly in mental health circles, about the pervasiveness of tech and social media and communication and all of that, all of the ways that those kinds of inputs kind of can dominate our lives now.
Yes.
There's at the same time, there's been a renewed interest, not just in Jewish or Christian or religious circles, but broadly about the value of unplugging, right? Like of taking time taking time to sort of consciously set aside those inputs to do something else, whatever that other thing is. I think that that's like a valuable idea sort of on its own. How it relates in my practice and how it relates to people who think about that in terms of Shabbat is I'm not just going to take any time, like I'm not just going to choose any time randomly as my unplugging time, or for any amount of time. Rather, I'm going to sort of lean into a rhythm with it. And I'm going to designate, or I'm going to honor the designation of a very specific time in the week that is my unplugging time. And there's something about the ritual of it, and there's something about the kind of regularity of it that I have found both challenging and valuable. Shabbat comes in the Jewish tradition. Shabbat is observed from Friday night to Saturday night. In many Christian denominations, the Lord's Day is on Sunday. But whenever that time is in your practice, to say, well, that's when it's going to come. Whether I'm ready for it or not, whether I want it to be then or not, it's not on Tuesday, it's not on Wednesday, it's not when it's convenient for me. It's sort of following a pattern or a rhythm that I'm ascribing to.
That helps you plan for it a little bit. That helps you anticipate, get things in place, so to speak.
The planning for it is actually totally key.
Yeah.
Right. Like, Shabbat is as much about the day itself as it is about preparing for the day.
Yes. And
in some ways, from a mental health perspective, that is actually where the real work can happen, is to say, all right, I know that I want, let's say, let's like make it a little easier. Let's say I know that I want to have 2 hours of unplugging time on Friday evening. What do I have to do to get that, to be ready for that? Do I have to finish a game, finish a text, finish an email, finish some like tasks?
By the way, every time I want to text you, it's a Saturday. I cannot tell you how many times, I got to send this thing. Oh,
but you can.
I can send it to you. You won't see it till the next day. But oh my God, I only think about you on Shabbat.
I appreciate that. I'm glad I have an association of Shabbat with you. Look, right. So that's one of the things that's kind of iconoclastic about this, is that we've become accustomed to on-demand communication, and we expect everybody to be responsive at all times. Look, one of the things I love about your email signature, your emails, is that you include this line in your email signature that says your workday may not be my workday. So if you email me at 11 p.m., that doesn't mean that I have to respond at 11 p.m. and that you're not necessarily expecting that. But you have to include a note like that because the world doesn't operate like that anymore. We're expected to be reachable 24/7. And even to say, and I know people that have, in fact, there's a great book called Here All Along by Sarah Hurwitz, where she talks about also as an adult, who grew up in a secular context, experimenting with Shabbat as a religious practice. And at the time she was doing this, she was working at the White House, and she talked about how having to sort of educate her colleagues and her community of what that even meant to unplug for a day, because it was so not in their wheelhouse.
Well, and I would think in your case. So, and by the way, shout out to Treffert Studios supervisor Sarah Kaiser. I lifted that from her email signature because it's true. I have a weird work rhythm, and I pick the kids up, so I stop, at 4:30 sometimes. Then I do another hour of work at 10, and I could send the emails, but sometimes just fire them off, for better or worse. But now, so you are someone who went from, like you said before, using your phone and computer, whatever, on Shabbats to then not doing it. And so when we talk about mental health and your day-to-day average Joe or average Joe's child getting off of their phone, laptop, iPad, whatever, it's a huge change. And so can you share a little bit about strategies from your personal experience? I imagine there was a period of time, maybe at the beginning, when you had an impulse to pull out your phone or something, and you're like, oh, I can't do that right now. How did you navigate that, and what was it like?
Well, first of all, to be clear, I still have impulses like that. Like it's not perfect. It's progress, not perfection, right? Yeah. Like it's not, because I adopted these practices as an adult, and also because I'm of an age, as are you, I think, that I'm
2 years younger than you.
So for the record,
gap here, but go on.
I'll try to speak across the lines of difference here. But I also remember some part of my adulthood that I did not have a smartphone.
Yes, for sure.
And that nobody had smartphones. Yeah. So I remember being able to function as a human being without having access to my email and my texts all day.
I mean, I remember not when emails weren't a thing yet.
Exactly. So that gives me a little bit of an on-ramp that someone who's like a digital native maybe can't imagine.
Yeah, sure.
But also, like, to answer your question, I mean, I started slow. Like first I started with an observation that once I did have a smartphone, I was fixated on it all the time. And I would use it at night, and I would use it first thing in the morning. And, it just took over my life, and it affected other parts of my relationships and my work and my health in other ways. So it started with that recognition. And then fortunately, I was also sort of becoming aware of a Jewish tradition that had an answer for that. The answer for that, or one answer for that, is Shabbat. Like, we're building it in for you. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to decide when it's a good time or when you've done too much we're just going to take that out of the equation and say it's from Friday night to Saturday night. That's your unplugging time. And I started slow. I started by saying, can I not check my phone from Friday dinner time to bedtime?
Oh, okay.
What does that do for me? What do I feel like I'm missing? And this was at a period of time, I mentioned there's all these other restrictions around Shabbat practice, but I wasn't really engaging in any of those. I would still go out. I would still spend money. I would still use the subway. I was living in New York at the time. It was really just about logging off.
Sure. That was your first step.
Yeah. And then I tried to expand that time little by little, but I'll tell you something, it's a lot easier. And this also comes to a mental health component. Shabbat, or any unplugging practice like that, is a lot easier if you're in a community of other people that are trying to do the same thing. Yeah. When it can be very isolating. Yeah. And that could have adverse mental health effects. If let's say you're someone that's geographically isolated from your support community.
Sure.
And your only way of staying in touch with them is through your phone.
Yeah.
And I think during COVID, a lot of people experienced things like this really acutely. Then it might be more stressful and more damaging to you than it will be helpful to you to cut yourself off from that community for 25 hours. Right. And that's something to know. And then what I would say in that case is maybe there's a partial unplugging, right? Maybe you turn off notifications, but you have your phone with you in case you need to reach out to somebody. Sure. And I know people that practice like this. You talk to friends and family, but you don't read the news, and you don't just scroll through Instagram or whatever. You kind of create a little separation from how you would behave the rest of the week.
Okay, so this is an important point here, and it's a great analogy when you talk about starting small and building out. You know, I have the conversation multiple times per day with families who have either young kids or teenagers. He's on the phone, she's on the phone too much, hours at a time, not going to bed. I can't stop them. I can't get them off of it. And, you know, I'm trying to figure out the best guidance for that. Should there be a nightly equivalent of Shabbat or an unplug where you just from the get-go say, look, 8 to 9 p.m., everything's unplugged?
So this is where we come back to this idea of Shabbat having two columns.
Okay.
And that's why I wanted to start with that, because there's a list, because if we only talk about Shabbat as taking things away, as sort of punitive, and we don't focus on what we want to do while we're not doing those other things, it's going to feel very empty. The vision of Shabbat is not sitting in a dark, cold room, staring at the wall, feeling hungry. Like that is some people's probably conception of it. I mean, that may be some people's conception of it, but that's not the goal. Right. The goal is that by removing the labor of your life for a period of time, you've opened up not just time, but focus and attention to other kinds of inputs. So let's take cooking, for example. Okay. Cooking for a lot of people is therapeutic and meditative and restorative. And like, that's totally fine. But let's say that I'm going to take food preparation out of my day on Shabbat. I'm going to do it all on Friday or a Thursday or whatever. Then I have a day to coast. I have a day that when I feel hungry, there's already food prepared for me and it's in the refrigerator and I just have to take it out and eat it. And I have more time to enjoy the food. And I'm not thinking about buying ingredients, and I'm not thinking about prepping, and I'm not thinking about, and maybe you don't even clean up. Like, you leave the dishes in the sink for a couple of hours and life goes on. Like, you know, you create more time when you leave certain tasks out. So now going back to the phones, right? When the parent says, from 8 to 9, you're not going to do X, Y, Z, but doesn't think about what could fill that time. And if then it's going to feel like taking something away. But if instead the conversation is from 8 to 9, we're going to play a board game, or from 8 to 9, we're going to take a walk. A lot of board games growing up. We did. That was one thing that we did in our Mastermind. Masterpiece was a different game where you bought and sold art. Oh yeah, that's right. Trouble with the Boggle. Boggle was only fun for you. It was only fun for me. Boggle, we would be on word 6 and Jeremy would need a new pad of paper. That was right. I built a lot of my confidence playing Boggle as a kid. So it wasn't like prescribed, but that was what I think we all enjoyed, and we had a good table where we did it, and we would just go and get a game, and that's at a certain age. I mean, I think my kids are 8, 4, and 2. Maybe we can start to do some of that stuff, not obviously with a 2-year-old, but when you get into the prime age where it's kind of fun, some gentle competition and stuff like that. But you're saying 8 to 9 is like game time at our house, so it's something to look forward to, as opposed to you're suddenly being deprived of something, which I like a lot. And also, by the way, it teaches, well, when you talk about the Shabbat thing anyway, executive functioning skills. I have so many patients with ADHD, for example, who actually might benefit just from the practice of stopping on Friday, even if they don't celebrate or observe Shabbat, but planning what you're going to do on Saturday on Friday. Of course. That's a life skill. That's a grown-up skill. That's something that a lot of grown-ups don't know how to do. And you could really, encourage some good family bonding time and say, hey, Fridays, why don't you reserve 15 minutes after dinner to plan something that you'll do on Saturday, or something that you do on Sunday, whether it's going for a walk or something. And you might even be cultivating that part of the brain tissue that does that thinks ahead. Right. So that's another kind of added benefit, I would think. And it opens up the possibility for you to enjoy the things that you already have instead of going out to get new things. I mean, again, we're moving away from unplugging a little bit, but like one shift that I made is like not buying things on Shabbat, because it sends a message. It doesn't mean that I have everything that I need in the world, but it means I probably have enough to get through the day. And thank God, of course, not everybody has that luxury, but again, it's about planning and preparation. If I think about it in advance, I know that I can coast for that day.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't think about it in advance, then that day can be kind of dicey.
Yeah, and you let you be present
and stressful.
Lets you
right.
be, we talk a lot about mindfulness and being present and in the moment, and so it removes that element of chaos and what am I going to throw together and stuff like that. By the way, and we only have. Let's go till 12:50 or 12:48.
You didn't ask me if I'm free till then.
Huh?
What if I'm not free?
You might have some planned rest.
That's your guest in the middle of a broadcast.
Listen, I'm going to
extend the time.
I'm going to cut into your rest time a little bit. We're supposed to end at 12:45. Maybe we can, milk a few extra minutes out of here. So if you're just joining us, or if you've just joined us, this is Divergent Minds coming at you live from SSM Health Treffert Studios here in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. I am Jeremy Chapman, child and adolescent psychiatrist. My brother, David Chapman, rabbi. We're talking about unplugging, Shabbat, and mental health. And I would love to see, if a couple people watching want to put in a comment on one of the feeds here, something that you have done either on your own or with your family to fill in the void, the inevitable void that comes when it's either planned or unplanned time to unplug. Because that is huge thing. We mentioned board games, but it's so true. Parents will say you have 10 minutes left of screen time, and usually the thing that comes next might be it's time to get ready for bed. Right. That's not necessarily something that people would look forward to. And if there could be some quality family time, reading stories together, totally, interacting, nightly family meeting, whatever it is. To occupy that would probably help smooth the transition. Absolutely.
Part of what is countercultural about this idea is the idea that I would spend waking hours not being productive.
Right.
It's not about sleep. I mean, you can sleep on Shabbat. That's fine. We all need to sleep more, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is to actively rest, to actively think about things that I need to do to restore my soul, to refill the well of my relationships, to have time to focus on an intellectual sort of or spiritual or artistic pursuit that's not part of my day-to-day, to read for pleasure, to be creative. Right.
Because I think in terms of kids, right, they're not even necessarily even aware in touch with the whole spiritual deeper level stuff. They need to have some sort of they're not worrying about not being productive.
Well, they are actually, but even kids are acculturated by our society to be goal oriented, and even their extracurricular activities.
Arguably,
yes, of course, they all have STEM skills, and everything is goal oriented. Even the extracurricular activities from a very young age are about getting on the next team, getting on the next league, developing your skills, getting into the Junior Olympics. That is the world that we live in. So even if it's doing something that has no sort of value, do you know what I mean? Do something that you're not good at. Do putts around the garden, but don't be a professional gardener. We don't spend, we as a culture don't spend a lot of time on pure hobbies,
or just observing and being curious, and stepping out into nature and looking really closely at an ant,
totally,
and watching what it does
without a goal in mind, without a learning outcome,
we're
curriculum.
Going to understand ant behavior,
right.
Just having no agenda whatsoever. So those are some things, and depending on where you are, you can do more outside stuff, or you may want to bundle up. I like that. And in these last few minutes here, before we give our little assignment to everybody, I'm trying to think about, again, the interactions between unplugging, taking, putting devices away, and restoring ourselves. Another concept that is foreign to a lot of people is, you mentioned a punitive atmosphere, where people by default have access to their games or their screens and stuff, and then if they mess up, they lose it, and that causes a huge issue. As opposed to, I recommend parents every night the phones go to sleep in mom and dad's room, or in your grown-ups room, and in the morning you can earn them by doing maybe a couple key things like brushing your hair and brushing your teeth. Or maybe it's not until after school that you can earn them after you do your work. So there's always the opportunity to earn something and have this positive atmosphere of gaining things. And as opposed to living in fear of losing something. And then also when it's time to put it away, also come up with a way that feels like a win, a gain. Now I get to do this next thing.
But I think that's beautiful. I think that's good advice for parents and grownups dealing with kids that can't imagine letting go of their phones. But again, like what I appreciate about the rhythm of Shabbat is that it comes every Friday night, whether I've been good or bad, like whether I've used my phone too much or used my, it takes the carrot and stick out of the equation entirely. It's just something that the whole family is doing at this appointed time. And again, Friday night is what the Jewish tradition offers, but in your family or in any family, it could be Wednesday night that we're going to do it or whatever. I mean, that's, but the idea is that it's ritualized. And then I would even say, set it up as a ritual. Like, I like your little image of putting the phones away to bed. Like that could be built out into like a little drama. You know what I mean? We're actually going to put them in a little bed. And by the way, there's an organization called Reboot that has really pushed this idea of global day of unplugging that happens every March. And they they make little like phone sleeping bags.
Oh, I wanted to go on Shark Tank with this, but my thing is it's like a house or it's something where all the phones go together, be with each other during mealtime and during the night. So yeah, it's an established place. It can be customized, but kids could do it as a school project.
Absolutely.
It's got a hole for each wire to go through, and that would be a logical way to but it's
ritualized. It's not a punishment. It's like we're all doing this together actively and consciously, and like it has a beginning and a middle and an end, and it helps. Again, it helps with the predictability. It helps with the preparation. And after a couple of weeks or after a couple of months, it just becomes built into the rhythm of the week. And then it's not hopefully, I mean, it moves away from being like a tear fest every time to saying something that we actually look forward to, and something that we embrace and something that we're excited, like, oh, now it's time to like get out the little house for our phones.
Right. And whatever. You said we could probably build up. You could start by saying, all right, for 15 minutes every night. Now, but then that stands in contrast. One of the things we were talking about before we went live, and it is a quarter till right now, so we're going to stop in a second. But just this last point is sometimes the nature of a game or a show is that it's not going to predictably end at 8:30 on the dot. And you don't want to take someone away when they're one of 4 people left in a Fortnite battle royale out of 100, and then it's 8:30 on the dot, and so we must go. That's going to be a tantrum. Or if they're in the last few minutes of a movie. So could it be defined as at the next stopping point after 8:30 or something like that? I mean, giving a little bit of leeway here so that we can all kind of not resent it too much.
Is there a question?
There's a question here. We'll just leave that out there to simmer with people. The final question from some anonymous person watching is: have you always dressed like twins or just for the show? And not only we also matched
the Fond du Lac lighthouse that we were at earlier today.
I keep looking at this preview as it looks like we're floating in a foamy ocean with a gray sky.
We're in a little phone-free zone here. No, the truth is I got dressed this morning and drove from Northbrook to Milwaukee to meet Jeremy, and he came out of his house wearing the same shirt.
And I had a chance to change shirts, but I thought this would be.
We decided to lean into it.
Be better. Yeah, we're leaning into it.
So can I give the assignment? Because actually it relates to that dilemma.
Yes.
The assignment or the offer, the opportunity that I want to encourage people to try is sometime in the next week to spend 10 minutes preparing to rest for 2 hours. So rest can mean unplug or whatever you want to fill that in with. But the idea is to get into the habit, like Jeremy was saying, that I can't just toggle from the work day or from my school life or whatever into that spaciousness of rest and unplugging and Shabbat on a dime. It takes some preparation. So what could that look like? Spend 10 minutes preparing a meal that you're not going to eat right away, but that you're going to put in the fridge and eat later. Or spend 10 minutes finishing a task that then you don't have to think about for the next couple hours. Spend 10 minutes, putting the laundry in so that for 2 hours, it can just run and do its cycle and you don't have to interact with it. But getting into that habit of thinking of rest as something that deserves preparation and is more rich when it is prepared is again, it's a little bit of a practice that we need to cultivate. So set aside a timer or whatever for 10 minutes and you spend that time queuing up a rest period to happen in the future.
Planning it. Yeah.
Planning it. I'd be curious to hear what people come up with.
I'd love to hear what people come up with. And, we design these 5 to 10 minute assignments because for those watching during a theoretical lunch break, a daily Shabbat between 12 and 1, it's 12:48 right now. You have a little bit of time to do it right now, right after we finish. Tell us what you come up with. Please also answer the other question about what you would recommend families, for instance, do to fill up that gap time that happens when they put their phones away. Thank you for watching. And we're going to keep doing this every Wednesday. New topics. We welcome ideas for new topics. Thanks so much to Rabbi David Chapman.
Thank you for having me
up here. And Diane L. Nelson wrote,
whoever could that be?
Why can't you talk to your mother more? Okay, so we'll work on that. We'll brainstorm that. Maybe we'll plan a conversation
with her
that we can have with her
in the future.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon and evening, and we are out.
Thank you.